The U.S. economy shrank by 0.3% in the first quarter of 2025, worse than any major forecast. That contraction came just days before the White House rolled out a sweeping new tariff package. Factories hadn't even felt the full hit yet, but the fear was already baked in. Investment froze. Orders stalled. And one of America's oldest automakers began slipping into crisis, not because the market went cold, but because Washington turned up the heat. Before we get into it, subscribe to Traveling Vibes, because these are the stories you need to hear before the next economic shock hits. Ford didn't make a flashy announcement. No emergency press conference, just silence. Then, a quiet admission. Profit expectations slashed by $1.5 billion. Financial guidance suspended indefinitely. It wasn't just a bad quarter, it was the beginning of a breakdown. And the question hanging over every boardroom and break room across the country: can a policy meant to protect American manufacturing end up breaking it from the inside out? Because what's happening at Ford isn't just a company story. It's a warning. It started with a single line buried deep in Ford's latest earnings call. No big headlines. No bold press release. Just 5 quiet words that shook the entire industry. We are suspending our guidance. For Wall Street, that was the red flag. For Main Street, the consequences would come later, through paychecks, prices, and broken promises. Ford had entered 2025 expecting to make between $7 and $8.5 billion in profit. That was before the tariffs hit. By July, they had already cut $1.5 billion from projections and told investors not to expect any more updates this year. The numbers spoke louder than any campaign slogan. Net income plunged 64% in the first quarter, from $1.3 billion a year ago to just $473 million. Revenue slid to $46 billion, a 5% drop analysts at Morgan Stanley called a strategic tremor that could become a long-term fracture. Investors reacted fast. After-hours trading sent Ford shares tumbling more than 2%, wiping out billions in market value. It wasn't panic, it was recalibration. Confidence cracked. And behind the scenes, executives scrambled. The 47th president had promised to bring manufacturing back. Instead, Ford was trying to figure out how to hold on to what it still had. At the center of the crisis were the new tariffs, 25% on imported light-duty vehicles, aimed at forcing companies to assemble more inside U.S. borders. But Ford's supply chain wasn't built for nationalism. It was built for efficiency. 3 of their most popular models, assembled in Mexico, were now too expensive to move across the border. Ford had no choice but to raise prices on all 3, risking sales drops in a year already weakened by inflation fatigue. And that wasn't the only casualty. China, once a growing market for Ford's electric SUVs and performance sedans, slammed the door shut. Beijing retaliated with a crushing 145% tariff on American vehicle imports. Ford responded the only way it could, by pulling out. Dozens of export routes were suspended. Launch plans were frozen. Dealers in Shanghai and Beijing were stuck with inventory they couldn't move. Inside the company, everything changed. High-level meetings that once focused on future investment now revolved around cost control and damage limitation. Factories designed for expansion were told to pause. International hiring was frozen. One Ford executive told the Wall Street Journal off the record, "We're not a startup, but right now we're operating like one, cutting, pivoting, reacting day by day." It was a strange reversal. A century-old company, a symbol of American industry, now reduced to watching spreadsheets by the hour, hoping the next policy announcement didn't pull another thread from the fabric. This wasn't Ford's first crisis, but it might be the first one where Washington, not Detroit, was behind the wheel. And the road ahead? No longer paved with certainty. Not when a single White House order can undo 5 years of planning. Not when global markets respond to politics more than performance. Ford isn't filing for bankruptcy, but something is clearly broken. And it's not just the bottom line. It's the belief that you can build anything stable when the rules keep changing. The storm didn't stop at Ford, Within weeks, General Motors delayed its quarterly investor call, pulled back a $4 billion stock buyback plan, and put several global expansion projects under review. Stellantis followed suit, freezing hiring across North American plants and postponing new equipment upgrades slated for late 2025. Toyota didn't wait either. The Japanese giant paused capital investments in its Kentucky and Ontario facilities, citing supply chain uncertainty and shifting policy dynamics. Behind closed doors, the message was the same. Don't bet on anything. Not this quarter. Maybe not even this year. But the tremors didn't stay in the boardroom. In Ingersoll, Ontario, union leaders issued a blunt warning to thousands of Canadian auto workers. Postpone major purchases, don't take on new loans. Factory shutdowns could happen with little or no notice. And they did. In early July, multiple Canadian plants halted production lines without fanfare or media coverage. One Ford facility in Oakville sent workers home indefinitely. Another in Windsor switched to half capacity, no overtime. The word spreading across lunchrooms wasn't restructuring, it was survival mode. Ironically, these plants weren't underperforming. They were simply in the wrong country. For the first time in decades, the invisible lines that once connected North America's auto network were hardening into borders again. The United Auto Workers in the U.S. didn't flinch. UAW President Shawn Fain called the tariffs a long overdue correction after decades of factory closures, invoking towns like Lordstown, Ohio, places where jobs vanished and never returned. But in Canada, labor leaders were furious. The same policies giving U.S. workers hope were putting Canadian families on the brink. The alliance that once united North American labor was splintering in real time. In one meeting between union officials from both sides of the border, a Canadian rep reportedly walked out after a UAW spokesperson defended the tariffs as necessary losses. That phrase, necessary losses, has since echoed across Ontario talk radio and Reddit threads with a bitterness that can't be scripted. Because here's the truth. What looks like policy on paper often feels like personal failure in real life. A second-shift worker in Windsor doesn't care if it's a macroeconomic adjustment. She cares that her child's summer camp just got canceled because overtime dried up. She worries whether her car payment will clear in August if production doesn't resume. Meanwhile, corporate leaders are just as adrift. They built strategies around the assumption that North America would remain one integrated production zone. Shared parts, shared logistics, shared talent. Now, they're drawing contingency maps that feel like Cold War relics, marking red lines across trade zones, rewriting supplier contracts, rerouting components. As one Stellantis executive told the Financial Times anonymously, it's not just the tariffs, it's the tone. Every week feels like another unpredictable turn. What's happening at Ford, and across the auto industry, is more than a business story. It's a test of how much disruption an economy can take before something gives. The numbers, the plant closures, the canceled projects, they all tell one part of the story. But the bigger part is happening quietly, in homes, in factories, and in offices, where people are trying to plan their futures with no clear rules and no stable ground to stand on. Tariffs, supply chains, trade wars, they sound like abstract policies until they land in your paycheck, your car payment, your next career move. And once confidence is shaken, it's not easily restored. We are living through a moment where the lines between economic policy and everyday life are disappearing. Where decisions made in Washington ripple instantly to Detroit, Windsor, Shanghai, and back again. And if history teaches us anything, it's that the real costs aren't always the ones printed in quarterly reports. They're the ones carried quietly by workers, families, and communities. If you want to keep following the story as it unfolds, not just the headlines but the hidden impacts, make sure you subscribe to Traveling Vibes, because the road ahead isn't just uncertain, it's already here.